refer to the types of munitions according to their tube. We'll call them the external tube and the internal tube. The external tube, this is a small tube, takes less material in order to have a launcher. The panzerfaust is an example of an external tube. Your warhead is outside the tube. The bazooka is an internal tube. The projectile is inside of the tube. The warhead itself is inside of the tube. Now, some of these are actually rocket-propelled, like the American bazooka and like the Panzerschreck. But the Panzerfaust, just like the Davis gun, fires off of a black powder charge. There is no rocket. There is no rocket. But you can also see that even though it doesn't have the same trigger grouping, the Panzerfaust 150 is, well, it's an RPG too, which is going to be the next iteration we're going to bring up. The Panzerfaust. Are there any Panzerfaust in Ukraine? No, there are not. There are no Panzerfaust in Ukraine. But there's a lot of RPG-2s, a lot of RPG-2 knockoffs. It's basically the same thing. It just uses a pistol trigger grouping and a pistol grip. Although you could actually fire one of these today with the same trigger grouping as on a Panzerfaust. You could literally, on an RPG-2, take the Panzerfaust grouping off of a Panzerfaust and put it onto the RPG-2. Just make sure that the trigger pin lines up with the hole. It'll fire the RPG-2 as well. Although I wouldn't recommend it. The RPG-2 is basically a Panzerfaust. The Russians were working on the RPG-1, which was their own native version. Then they caught the Panzerfaust and went, all right, well, we're going to do things a little bit different. The Panzerfaust was a small charge, massive warhead, and of course, these things only had a range at the very beginning of about 30 meters. It's about 90 feet. That's about the distance from here to the library. You would literally have to be that close to a tank to hit the fucking thing. When you consider that Hitler Youth were out there in the streets of Berlin firing these things at Russian tanks, yeah, it's a pretty scary and pretty hellish situation you're imagining. Imagine the SS coming to your house and telling you that they're going to take your 9-year-old and that he's going to run a Panzerfaust. Imagine that. Do they have anything close to the Panzerfaust in Ukraine? Yes, a lot of people are making their own manpads. A lot of people in Ukraine are making their own portable rocket systems. Some of them, they're actually harvesting their own materials. Yeah, did you know that you can make the majority of what you need to have a black powder charge from your own excrement, your own urine? That's right. You can look it up, how to get charcoal out of feces. And, of course, how to get the nitrates that you need out of your urine. Both are pretty simple methods, just so you know. There's 3 components to black powder. And the Panzerfaust, using a black powder charge, we're talking about gunpowder, just regular old gunpowder. We're not talking about modern smokeless powder. We're not talking about Pyrodex, we're just talking about basic gunpowder. You can literally do this anywhere. Now, the majority of what we're going to be looking at from here on in is going to be 40 millimeter. 40 millimeter, 40 millimeter. The reason I'm saying 40 millimeter instead of telling you the size of the shaped charge heads is because all of them that have an external one All of them that have the shape charge warhead on the outside, they're all 40 millimeters on the inside. There was one version of the RPG, and also, no, it was just the RPG. One version of the RPG that was in 37 millimeter for a very short time, and then they went, well, that's a bad idea. We're just going to stop, and we're going to make it a standard 40 millimeter. It's easier. So the RPG-7, or the RPG-2, works in the same way. The RPG-7 is a rocket. The RPG-2 is propelled the same way as the panzerfaust. So pretty much everything from here on in is either going to be a panzerfaust type weapon or a panzerschreck type weapon. The panzerschreck type weapon would have a shape charge on the inside of the barrel, and of course the panzerfaust has it on the outside. So it makes it easy to differentiate between the two. Now, although there aren't any of these in use, so far as I'm aware, there are some that, well, Ukraine does have a museum that has panzerschrecks in it and panzerfaust in it. They're likely demilled and will never fire. If somebody wanted to go destroy that historical referencing there, they probably could, but they want to. New manufactured stuff is easier. Why not build it out of garbage? And that's one of the things that the Ukrainians are showing you guys. Something that the homeless already know. You can build with trash. By the way, those of you who have grandparents that survived the Great Depression, they know how to live off of trash too. I saw some pictures from the Great Depression where people went around and collected old license plates, fixed their roofs with it by using them as shingles. Yup. Necessity is the mother of invention. Well, the Panzerfaust, or Tank Fist, this came out in 1943. We didn't really encounter it much until 44 and 45. They made millions of them, literally millions of them. They still dig these things up all over the place, all over Germany, all over occupied France, all over occupied Belgium, all over occupied Europe, all over. And they're still popular today. People have made their own, basically, Panzerfaust out of metal beer bottles or soda cans filled with all sorts of different stuff. Some of the concoctions they make with wax are absolutely amazing. I mean, it's such a simple thing to make and create and to standardize that you could literally make these by the hundreds in your own room in your house. You could literally, in the space that most people have in their closet, you could literally sit there and manufacture these things by the hundreds. You wouldn't be able to store them all in your closet. Alright, so let's get on to the next one, right? Do I believe that we as Americans are likely to encounter these things in our lifetime? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that the oceans and our technology will keep us safe reasonably for a time. But America's fallen apart. We got the dumbest people in the country running the place. Well, that doesn't say much for the rest of the people, since they're the ones that voted these idiots into office, but what options did we have? I want every soldier to go home and be safe. That is my wish for soldiers. Not for harmful, hateful things to happen to them, but for them to make it safely home. And not get killed by ignorance or stupidity.